In September of 2012, 30-year-old naturalist photographer Elwyn Harrowell went on a solo hike in Denali National Park. She left a message to her sister about her estimated return at the end of the week and disappeared. A few days later, her car was found near the trailhead, but no trace of the hiker herself was found. Search teams worked for weeks. Helicopters, rangers, volunteers, dogs that lost their scent near the Little Sioux riverbed. Autumn turned to winter, and Elwyn's disappearance became another cold case in the Anchorage police archives. 6 years have passed. In May of 2018, a hunter named Liam Garrett was repairing an old prospector's hut on the same bank of the Little Sioux. When he removed the rotten floorboards, the shovel hit something hard. The earth crumbled away, revealing the corner of a heavy wooden chest with wrought iron ribs. Inside, wrapped in a tarpaulin that crumbled when touched, were human bones. Next to them were a strap from a photo bag, a fragment of tourist equipment, and a crumpled waterproof tube. In September of 2012, it was a quiet, clear autumn in Alaska. The air was already frozen at night, and during the day, the sun only illuminated the coppery hills of aspen and birch. According to the materials we gathered, Elwyn Harrowell, a naturalist photographer from Anchorage, was preparing for another solo outing. The plan was familiar and clear. A few days in the mountains near Denali, starting from a trail local volunteers call the Sunshine Trail, a deserted crossing along a watershed, sleeping in a tent, returning by the end of the weekend, and a mandatory call to her sister. In her letters and short notes, Elwyn described the hike as a respite for the eyes after weeks of processing the images. She was not an adventurer in the romantic sense. Her caution is confirmed by her friends and notebook entries, repeated equipment lists, double weather checks, spare batteries, duplicate maps. In the first days of September, she made several stops at specialty stores in Anchorage. The owner of one of the gear shops recalled that they talked about the wind forecast for the mountain passes and the first freezing in the marshlands. According to him, Elwyn was dressed like a person who doesn't like surprises in the field. A light-down sweater, a membrane jacket, sturdy boots, storm pants, a knife on his belt, and a list. Later, he would repeat the same thing to investigators, clarifying that her backpack fit properly, without overloading. For many people, the road north to Tokitna begins with coffee and fuel, and here our story also connects with routine. A dash cam recording from the gas station where Elwyn stopped before heading into the mountains. She takes a hot drink, a sweet snack, changes a half-empty cylinder for a full one. No fuss, no signs of haste. There are no companions or random annoying conversationalists in the frame. It's just a woman who seems to know exactly where she's going. The trail then leads to the parking lot at the beginning of the Sunshine Trail, where her dark blue station wagon remains neatly parked with her documents in the glove compartment and a tidy trunk that lacks anything that might indicate an abrupt cancellation of the route. The disappearance is recorded not by a flash but by immersion in absence. When the deadline for the agreed-upon call passed, Sister Ingrid first checked the basics. Whether there was coverage in the area of the route, whether the weather had deteriorated enough to delay the departure. She called Elwyn's friends, wrote to her social media, and looked at her recent messages. Only then did she contact the rangers. According to the rescuers themselves, the response was quick. The previous schedule had to be changed, crews had to be recruited, and air sorties had to be coordinated. The first concentric circles appeared on the map. Possible trails, places of convenient crossings, heights from which signals can be seen. Searching in those areas is always a compromise between speed and safety. The forests are dense, the water is cold even in September, and the peat bogs hold moisture like a memory. In the first days, we examined the obvious: side branches of the trail, popular places to spend the night, and Padi, where smoke from fires usually lingers. Helicopters were used, but the tops of spruce and fir trees can hide the brightest equipment, and the carpet of golden leaves quickly erases traces. The ground teams worked in sectors and set markers to avoid duplicating their work. According to the volunteers, they were looking for Elwyn as if she were their own. No indifference, only restrained, stubborn attention to every opportunity. Their guides described the route that led from the parking lot to the forest and then dissolved in the smells of moisture, lichen, and old wood. Several times the animals confidently took a direction to the northeast, but then, on sandy placers and near the sinkholes of river branches, the thread broke. The reports are short, almost dry phrases. The trail is uncertain. Scent drift. Mixing of odors. The autumn wind was doing its job. At the same time, they were checking information tails. In Tokitna's bar, they said that they saw a tourist with a backpack, but they didn't give any details. Face, clothes, brand of equipment. At other gas stations, they looked for traces of payments, at roadside shops for receipts with the right time. Each such piece of evidence turned into a comparison and almost always ended in nothing. The rangers sent inquiries about the weather situation. It hadn't snowed much, but the temperature was dropping and the nights were getting longer. For an experienced traveler, this is not a death sentence, but every extra day in the wilderness without communication puts pressure on the clock. Nothing was found in Elwyn's apartment in Anchorage that would hint at a sudden change of plans. There were printed fragments of maps on the table, a scrap of paper with notes on water levels in tributaries in his jacket pocket, and a magnet with a schedule of the local photography community on the fridge. The box of personal items was missing a notebook and a small amulet that her sister had mentioned. These items could have been with her on the hike. The computer saved the last exported photos birds on migration, icy rocks, a bluish haze over the forest. Nothing that looked like a planned risk or a spontaneous encounter that could change the route. The days stretched on. When the first night frosts turned the morning ground to glass, the rescuers began to narrow the search area. They changed their tactics. From the wide ridge they descended to the beams, from the open glades to the thickets of dwarf spruce. Each new clue turned out to be just a reflection of an ordinary autumn. Moose tracks, other people's campfires, empty cartridge cases from hunters. At some point, hope became math. The probabilities decreased, and the time and effort required increased. The first wording about a break until the weather conditions change and switching to the monitoring mode appeared in the memos. When the first real snow fell, the ridges fell silent. It became risky for helicopters to climb in the fog and for ground teams to go out on ice fords. The decision to curtail the large-scale work was difficult but inevitable. Ingrid, according to those around her, did not try to fight the numbers of nature. She only asked not to close the door completely. The rangers left channels open for any new information, and the Anchorage police accepted the statement and began to form a separate case. Since then, Elwyn's story has been in a category that official documents call plain and cold, of unknown location. For people, this word meant something else. An empty seat at the table, a half-packed backpack in the closet, a route that turned into a line broken over the water. We return to this chronicle when there was nothing left to justify or embellish. Markers remain on the map, evidence of systematic work and human stubbornness. In the margins, there are names of volunteers walking in circles on wet moss and short notes about the weather, which repeat the same thing from edge to edge. Quiet, cold, unanswered. In such stories, absence is also a fact. It was this fact that became the final event of that September. Not a scream, but a hush that even the wind from Little Sioux did not dispel. In May of 2018, when the snow was receding from the rivers and the ground was still breathing ice, a local fisherman and hunter, Liam Garrett, decided to restore an old prospector's hut on the banks of the Little Sioux. It had been vacant since the 90s, leaning over, overgrown with moss, and with a door that wouldn't close. Garrett bought the land cheaply. He wanted to set up a quiet place for fishing. During the renovation, he set about replacing the rotten floor. After removing a few boards in the center of the room, he hit something hard with his shovel. At first, he thought it was an old barrel, but the metallic sound repeated itself. When he cleared the ground, the ribs of a wooden chest appeared, long, heavy, with forged corners. The ground around it was tightly tamped down, as if someone had once tried to hide it forever. Garrett lifted the lid, and a pungent, cold smell of decay escaped from inside. Inside was a torn tarpaulin with human bones visible underneath. The remains of clothing were partially preserved, a fleece jacket, pants, and a belt. Near the skeleton were a water bottle, an old model camera, and a crumpled map of the route. On its edge were red marks, blurred by moisture. In the corner of the chest was a waterproof tube, which experts said might once have contained records or photographs. Garrett ran outside and called the sheriff. His call was recorded at around 9 in the morning. By evening, the place was cordoned off, and a forensic team from Anchorage arrived. The work lasted 2 days. It was found that the pit had been prepared in advance. The edges were smooth, the bottom was lined with stones. The chest was made professionally from pine boards impregnated with varnish, which was miraculously preserved. The hut had been abandoned for at least 20 years. In old archives, it was listed as the property of a prospector named Douglas Kirby, who disappeared in the 60s. Then the land was passed from one hunting society to another and finally left without an owner. This explained why no one noticed that the floor was hiding the grave. The forensic experts described the remains as female, about 30 years old. Due to the cold under the floor, the tissues were partially mummified. No obvious injuries were found on the bones, but samples were taken for additional examination. The found items, a map and a camera, were packed as material evidence. Local residents recalled that tourists sometimes stayed in these places, but no one noticed anything strange. The hut was abandoned, unremarkable, and only during the spring thaw did the soil finally settle enough to allow the floor to cave in. The thaw brought the past to the surface. A short note was preserved in the notes of the detective who arrived at the scene. Under the floor, the past is not silent. It is waiting for its witness. On that day, no one knew that this chest would be the beginning of a new investigation that would force a return to the events of 6 years ago. In June of 2018, when the ice had already melted from the rivers and the Anchorage Police Department still smelled damp from the evidence brought in, a new stage of the Harrowell case began. The laboratory's examination confirmed that the death was caused by a blunt force trauma to the back of the head. The documents state that the injury was incompatible with life, inflicted at close range. The conclusion was unequivocal. The woman was killed, and then her body was hidden in a chest that was buried under the floor of an old hut. The time of death coincided with the date of her disappearance in the fall of 2012. The evidence was sorted and described. The remains of her clothes, a map of the route, a damaged camera, and a tube of documents. The most valuable was a small notebook sealed in a waterproof bag. Although most of the pages were faded, the last few survived long enough to be read. Elwyn kept her notes brief: observations, weather descriptions, distances between parking lots, and light conditions for shooting. In the penultimate entry, a sentence appeared: "I met a hermit who helped me cross the river." Then a few touches about the man: silent, beard, clear eyes, doesn't look drunk or dangerous. And a note: lives near an old copper mine. This passage was the first piece of evidence that led the investigation beyond the cabin itself. The detective in charge of the case commissioned a sketch based on the description. A portrait of a man with rough features, a thick beard, and a fishing cap was printed and displayed in the vicinity of Toquitna. The first days were fruitless. Most visitors to local shops and bars could not remember anything similar. But a week later, the owner of the Howling Moose Bar recognized the man. He said that the man came in from time to time, hardly spoke, and always sat alone. He introduced himself as Jack Thornbeck. According to the bartender, Thornbeck lived in the woods near Hatcher Pass. He used to work at a fishing base, then became a hermit. People described him as strange, but not aggressive. After that, the detective went to the area where, according to locals, his cabin was located. There, among the dense spruce forests, a few miles from the road, they really found a small wooden house made of logs and covered with polyethylene. Service records indicate that Thornbeck took the police's arrival calmly. He admitted that he had seen the woman with a backpack in the fall of 6 years ago when he was fishing near the ford. He said she asked for help crossing the river, and he showed her a safe place. They talked briefly and then parted ways. When asked if he saw her again, he said no. His alibi for that period, he was fishing alone, could be neither confirmed nor denied. The official report recorded it. Thornbeck is cooperating but reacts cautiously to questions. He avoids making direct statements, gets confused about dates, and sometimes switches the conversation to other topics. Nevertheless, some of his words became key. He recalled that that day, Elwyn was taking pictures of something at the entrance to an old copper mine, and later noticed a dark pickup truck parked along the forest road nearby. He couldn't make out the license plate, only the color, maroon or black. At the time, this detail was not developed, but it was recorded in the materials. Upon returning to Anchorage, the detective prepared an interrogation report and Thornbeck's signature samples. The lab checked his shoe prints and took DNA samples, a common procedure in cases involving unknown witnesses. There were no results, but the figure of the hermit became central to the investigation. His description was included in a press release, but without direct accusations. The police officially called him a possible eyewitness. In June, people started talking about the man from the woods in Tokitne. Some attributed strange habits to him, while others said he was just a recluse who couldn't stand the noise. Among the hunters, there was even a legend that Thornbeck never left his territory without a gun and a dog. The detective carefully studied this small evidence, realizing that it could be either innocent loneliness or something else, awareness of events he was not supposed to see. At this stage, however, there were no grounds for prosecution. Thornbeck did not disappear, run away, or try to get rid of things. His traces remained within the framework of his usual life: fishing, hunting, exchanging his catch for food in Tokitna. A brief description of his home appeared in the case file: a stove, an old radio station, several maps of the area, one of which marked the area near the mine. This only added weight to the words about the meeting with Elwyn. For the investigation, June was a month of clarification. Laboratories worked on the remains of the found diary, restored pages, and glued damaged sheets together. New fragments of text appeared in which Elwyn wrote about the feeling of being watched and the light from the headlights flashing behind the trees. It is not known whether this was fear or an accidental recording of surveillance, but these words made the detective return to the mention of the pickup truck. Gradually, a picture emerged from the individual details: a hermit, a mine, a car, and a disappearance that for many years seemed to be the result of an accident. Officially, Jack Thornbeck remained only a witness, but it was his description that became the first clue that led the investigation away from the cabin on Little Sioux to a wider, darker circle of events, where every fact seemed to be the imprint of someone's covert surveillance. In July of 2018, the investigation into the case of Elwyn Harrowell entered a new phase. The detective returned to the place mentioned by the hermit, Jack Thornbeck, an old copper mine near Hatcher Pass. Ore had once been mined here, but now everything was overgrown with moss and juniper. The entrance to the adit is half caved in, and next to it are the remains of a campfire ring, a rotten rope, a rusty bucket. Nothing that could be directly linked to Elwyn. However, the very fact that people were present here at the time of her disappearance made us dig deeper. The reports state that the police inspected the area for several hundred yards around, took soil samples, and checked the ashes. There were no signs of a recent fire, but under a layer of dry leaves, they found a burnt tin with a production date of 2012. This small artifact confirmed that someone had indeed been living in the camp at the time Alwyn was last seen. The detective spent the next weeks in the archives of the traffic police. He looked through inspection logs, highway surveillance cameras, and fuel transaction records. There was only one goal: to find the dark pickup truck that Thornbeck had mentioned. It was a titanic task. In 2012, hundreds of such vehicles passed through George Parks Highway. However, there was a coincidence among them. On the day that Alwyn set out on her route, cameras captured a maroon Ford F-150. The license plate matched the registration of a small Anchorage-based company, Northern Comfort Builders. The documents indicate that the car belonged to Gregory Reynolds, the owner of a company that built eco-friendly cottages. At the time, he was a well-known entrepreneur in the city, a member of the Chamber of Commerce, a family man, a man without any stains in his biography. The detective recorded his name in the materials not as a suspect, but as a person to be interviewed. Reynolds's official explanation for his presence in the area was simple. He was on his way to inspect a site for a potential project near Tokitna, stopping on the side of the road to take a break and take some photos of the area. According to him, he didn't see any tourists, let alone women with backpacks. All of his company's documents looked perfect at the time. However, for the detective, this coincidence looked too clean. The pickup truck was in the same place and on the same day that Alwyn disappeared. There were no witnesses to confirm Reynolds's route. His alibi consisted only of the words, "I was driving alone." In the middle of the summer, the detective began to check the financial condition of Northern Comfort Builders. In the city archives, they found tax returns that showed that in 2012, the company had significant losses. Construction on several projects was halted due to lack of funds. It turned out that the company had taken out short-term loans secured by machinery. The accounting department still had old invoices showing fuel costs in the Tokitna area, on the very days Reynolds was allegedly looking for a client. Throughout July, the detective talked to former employees of the company. One of them, a bricklayer, recalled that the boss often disappeared for a day or two on a business trip, without explaining where he was going. Another said that in the fall of 2012, Reynolds was nervous and ordered the company pickup to be repainted a lighter shade, allegedly because of the new logo. This detail was recorded, but at the time it had no evidentiary value. At the same time, police searched the area surrounding the mine, looking for the remains of the camp or traces of equipment. Several inches deep in the soil, they found fragments of boards that looked like construction boards. Perhaps someone had brought them in to make a shelter or platform. Analysis of the wood showed that it was factory processed, typical of private construction firms. Official reports do not contain direct conclusions. But a short phrase appeared in the detective's personal notebook. Construction worker in the woods, a pickup truck from the city, 6 years of silence, and still the smell of gasoline. It was during this period that he began to conduct parallel, non-public surveillance of Reynolds, checking old contracts, permits, and the owners of the land where the firm once operated. Reynolds remained impeccable on paper. He had a good reputation, a wife, 2 children, and a country house. His face often appeared in city magazines, a smiling man in a suit, next to the eco-friendly houses of his own design. But now, after 6 years of silence, his name suddenly reappeared in police reports, next to the Little Sioux River and a copper mine. To most, it looked like a coincidence. To the investigators, it was too clear a coincidence. And although there was no evidence, a new note appeared in the departmental archive. A person who was in the area of Harrowell's disappearance during the specified period. This was the beginning of a chain of checks that would reveal what exactly connected the successful businessman to the place where nature had remained silent for so long. In September of 2018, the case of Alwyn Harrowell moved quietly from the forests to the offices. The detective focused on the life and business of Greg Reynolds, the owner of the construction company Northern Comfort Builders. At first glance, his story was exemplary. A successful entrepreneur, a man who designed ecological homes of the future, and a participant in charitable initiatives. In the newspaper archives, there were several publications in which he smiled against the backdrop of wooden cottages, commenting on the advantages of clean architecture. But behind the facade, as it turned out, there was another picture. Tax documents for the year 2012 showed a sharp drop in profits. Debts were growing and bank loans were under pressure. Reports showed delays in payments, fines, and some accounts were closed without explanation. According to internal records, the company then lost 3 major contracts. Among them was a project for a forest residence near Tokitna. It was listed in the documents as an order from a private client from Connecticut, but no drawings, permits, or photos were found on the construction server. Only 2 pages remained in the company's archive: a purchase order for wood and a certificate of completion without the customer's signature. The detective contacted the city's Department of Development. They confirmed that no project with this address had been officially registered. That is, the construction, if it was carried out, was illegal. When the police officially sent a request, Reynolds responded in writing. His letter stated that the client had canceled the project, so the work was stopped before it began. But the accounting data did not agree with his explanation. The company's expenses included purchases of fuel, tools, and supplies during the period when Elwyn was hiking. Another source was a former accountant who worked for the company in those years. In his testimony, he confirmed that Reynolds was having serious financial difficulties. According to him, the owner was saving the business in any way he could, including taking private orders for cash that did not appear in the official books. The accountant hinted that some of the work was carried out in remote areas without permits or inspections. The notes from his confession were included in the case, although he asked that his name not be disclosed. The detective was building a theory. Elwyn could have accidentally stumbled upon one of these black construction sites. Perhaps she was filming the landscape and noticed equipment or people working without permission. Her diary contained references to an unexplained noise in the forest and car tracks where they shouldn't have been. These phrases have now gained weight. At the same time, the property of hut number 17, where the body was found, was being checked. The archives showed a strange pattern. Starting in 2012, taxes for it were paid regularly through a little-known intermediary firm with an address associated with an accountant for one of Reynolds' subsidiaries. At the time, this was not yet evidence, but it created a logical chain: construction activities, fictitious accounts, hidden property. During this period, Reynolds probably began to feel that he was being watched. According to his office staff, he became more cautious, demanded that the doors be locked, and that old projects not be discussed on the phone. One day, he called a detective, expressing outrage that the police were violating the privacy of an entrepreneur. The call was documented, but he did not file a formal complaint. After that, the detective obtained a warrant to analyze the corporate ties of Northern Comfort Builders. The investigation revealed that the company had a number of short-term contracts with contractors who worked only seasonally. Among the addresses in the invoices was a site near Little Sioux, the coordinates where the cabin was later found. For the police archive, this coincidence looked too direct to be a coincidence. However, there was no evidence of guilt. Reynolds was not prosecuted, and all the documents showed only financial instability, not a crime. In September, everything in his office looked like a model company. Clean windows, a green logo, and models of cottages. Next to them were stacks of promotional brochures with Reynolds' signature below the phrase, "We are building a future of trust." This contrast between the image and the shadow that had already been cast over his name created what police internal reports would later refer to as a perfect facade. In October of 2018, the investigation got its first real breakthrough. After several months of financial checks, the court issued a search warrant for Greg Reynolds' office home, and garage. The reason was tax discrepancies and fictitious accounts associated with the company that paid taxes for the land from cabin number 17. The search began early in the morning while Reynolds' family was still at home. According to the official report, the police found dozens of tools in his garage: electric drills, shovels, saws, and old containers of oil. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary contractor's workspace. But among this variety was a chainsaw, too clean for a tool that had been used for years. It looked washed, the surface was shiny, and even the chain had no grease residue. Forensic experts recorded the discovery, seized the saw for examination, and within a few days reported a match. Microscopic particles of wood, painted in the same shade of amber paint that covered the chest, found under the hut floor, were found on the chain teeth and body. This type of paint was not mass-produced. It was used for the exterior decoration of cottages of the Northern Comfort Builders Company. This coincidence was recorded in the report as potential evidence of a connection between the object and the burial site. Reynolds himself explained that he washed the dust off before the sale, and the paint color was accidental because he often painted display stands for clients. At the same time, the archivist continued to study the documents of the shell company through which taxes were paid for hut number 17. After several weeks of inquiries, it turned out that this company, registered formally to another person, received transfers from construction structures associated with Reynolds. A power of attorney in the name of his former partner was found in the documents, and small transactions marked for maintenance were found on bank statements. This made it possible to officially establish a financial connection between Reynolds and the area where the body was found. Against this backdrop, the detective turned again to Jack Thornbeck, the hermit who had first mentioned the pickup truck. He was summoned again, and this time the interrogation lasted several hours. According to investigators, Thornbeck looked exhausted and scared. Under the pressure of clarifying questions, he recalled a detail he had not mentioned before. On the day he saw the maroon pickup truck near the mine, a man in a dark jacket was standing next to it, carrying something long and heavy to the back. The shape of the object resembled a wooden chest or a large box. He didn't pay attention at the time because he thought it was building materials. There were no direct statements in his words, but the detail was consistent with other elements of the case. The report states, "The witness changed his initial testimony. The mentioned item corresponds to the dimensions of the found chest." For the investigation, this was the moment when assumptions turned into grounds for action. Based on the totality of the evidence, the paint match, financial ties, Thornbeck's testimony, the prosecutor's office approved an arrest warrant for Greg Reynolds on suspicion of the murder of Elwyn Harrowell. The arrest took place in the evening of the same day when he was returning from work. Police were waiting outside his home in a quiet Anchorage neighborhood. According to neighbors, several cars stopped at the same time, and it looked like a scene from a movie. Reynolds did not resist, only asked what he was being accused of. His wife and children were taken inside to avoid a public scene, but the news spread quickly. The next morning, local newspaper headlines were already reporting a shocking twist in the case of the missing photographer. During the first interrogation, Reynolds denied all charges. He insisted that he had never met Elwyn and had nothing to do with the cabin. The lawyer who arrived that evening said that the investigation was based only on assumptions, not facts. According to police officers, Reynolds behaved calmly, even coldly, as if he was confident that the case would not stand up to scrutiny. However, in internal memos, the detective noted that the calmness may not be confidence, but the fatigue of a man who knows the end of the game is near. For official records, this remained just an observation, but the case itself no longer looked theoretical. From the moment the garage was searched, it gained the weight of physical evidence that, for the first time in 6 years, connected the businessman to the place where Elwyn Harrowell's journey ended. In November of 2018, the Reynolds case crumbled like dry clay. After several hearings, the court found all the evidence to be circumstantial. The company's lawyer successfully proved that the chainsaw had no traces of blood, and the paint on it could have come from any construction site. The payments through the shell company were called ordinary financial optimization. The testimony of the hermit Thornbeck was found to be unreliable. Too many years had passed. Greg Reynolds was released on bail, smiling, neat, surrounded by journalists. It was a failure for the detective. The folders of materials resembled frozen shadows. Each document proved something, but none of them was conclusive. The phrase, "insufficient grounds for prosecution," appeared in the reports. The investigation was officially stopped. However, he could not close it in his head. It was when the facts dissolved into formalities that the detective went back to the beginning, to Elowen herself. He went through the archive of her belongings, which were stored in boxes in the police storage room, and looked at everything anew. A camera, a notebook, fragments of letters, an old laptop that was once considered technically defective. It was given to experts, and they were able to restore some of the images. Among them is a series of photos taken a few months before the disappearance, training for volunteers in Denali National Park. In most of the pictures, Elowen is working with a group of young rangers. In the background is a familiar man in a green uniform standing next to her, looking at her with a smile. He was identified from archival records as Ranger Michael Ross. His name had long appeared in the old records. He was among those who led the search for Elowen in 2012. At the time, he was described as professional, balanced, and experienced in mining operations. All testimonies about him were positive. However, the photographs revealed another angle, an unofficial, personal one. In a few shots, he leans over a map, while in others, he watches her as she takes pictures of the sunset. He is no longer just a colleague. The detective began to look into Ross's past. Reports from the Park Service mentioned that he had been working there since the early 2000s, had an impeccable reputation, and had received decorations for bravery. However, several former co-workers recalled that Ross was too reserved and rarely maintained friendships. One of the rangers said privately that Michael could stare at someone for hours without saying a word. All these details that had seemed unimportant before now took on a different meaning. Next came the emails. The police archives had a copy of Elowen's digital memory, but no one had analyzed it in depth. Now computer scientists have decrypted the hidden folder. It contained letters from an anonymous sender with a fictitious address. At first, they looked like ordinary correspondence between an admirer and a photographer. Admiration for her work, reflections on nature, poetic appeals. But the tone gradually changed. The compliments became annoying, the phrases were repeated, and there were hints of joint, secret meetings. In the last message, dated a week before the disappearance, the addressee wrote, "You don't have to go there alone. I see you everywhere. If I can't be with you in these woods, no one else will." Technical examination showed that the letters were sent from an address created through the public network of the national park. This fact fell like a cold drop on an old map. The sender used an official channel available only to Ranger Service employees. The detective made a request for log-in lists for that period. Among them was the name of Michael Ross. It wasn't proof yet, but the match seemed too close to call. He put all the documents aside and looked at the first search reports from 2012. In each of them, Ross was listed as the coordinator who was the first to arrive at the place of disappearance and ensured communication with the base. The person who organized the search could have concealed what he knew. For the investigator, this was a shift in thinking. If Reynolds' motive was based on self-interest, then another one emerged, a personal, emotional one. Dependence, fascination, obsession. For the first time, he suggested that the killer might not have been a bystander, but a person for whom Elowen had become an idea. Officially, at that time, the police had no reason to name a new name, but a short phrase appeared in the detective's working notes. The one who was looking for her afterwards was there before. Reynolds was released, and the circle of suspicion shifted imperceptibly from a businessman to a man who knew every trail, every ford, and for whom disappearance could be a form of possession. In December of 2018, the investigation, which had been almost abandoned, came to life again, this time in silence, without press releases or leaks. Ranger Michael Ross's name appeared in internal police documents as a person under surveillance. He continued to work for the Denali Park Service, going out on patrols and giving briefings to volunteers. His colleagues described him as disciplined, reliable, and a person you could rely on. In his official reports, there was not a single reprimand, not a single absence. But it was precisely this impeccability that was alarming. The surveillance was organized unnoticed. The detective who had stumbled upon Elowin's correspondence back in the fall realized that one careless move could destroy everything. In a few weeks, the agents noticed Ross's strange habits. He often visited old sections of the forest near Little Sioux where there were no service trails, staying there for hours without writing anything down. In winter, such hikes looked pointless. The snow was deep and visibility was minimal. But he went there as if he was fulfilling a duty. After the next observation, the police received grounds to search his house. The formal pretext was a routine check of his service weapon. The operation was conducted quietly while Ross was at work. Everything in the house, which stood on the outskirts of Anchorage, looked too orderly. Perfectly arranged books, a clean table with not a single personal photo on it. An old wooden chest was found in the attic. Inside, there were several notebooks folded by year and a box of films. In the report, the experts noted that the records belonged to one person, the handwriting was stable, and the style was identical. These were Michael Ross's personal diaries. Their content varied from working notes to confessions. The first volumes contained descriptions of patrols, observations of nature, and essays on the greatness of the forests. But then the text became darker. The name Elowin Harrowell appeared. At first, he wrote about her as an inspiration. She sees the forest as I do. She listens to the water. Later, the entries turned into appeals. I'm waiting for her to walk that path again. I saw her in the distance today. She didn't recognize me. In the last notebook, dated September 2012, the pages are full of uneven lines. Ross describes how he found her camp by the river, how he stood back while she took pictures of the dusk. A short excerpt follows. I told her we were made for this place. She got scared. She asked me to leave. I couldn't. The next paragraph is almost illegible, but the phrase is clear. A blow to the back of the head, she fell silent. Below, in a neat handwriting, is a note. Now she will stay here, in my forests. The notebooks found became what the reports called self-incriminating evidence. They contained not only a description of the crime, but also details that only a person present at the scene could know. The position of the body, the construction of the tent, footprints on the shore. After the examination, the handwriting was officially confirmed as that of Michael Ross. The arrest took place 2 days later. He was detained during a routine patrol in the Denali area. According to eyewitnesses, Ross was standing near a Park Service car when 2 officers approached him. He didn't run away, didn't argue, just nodded, as if he had been waiting for this for a long time. The police report states, the suspect did not resist, was calm, and his tone was monotone. During the interrogation, Ross spoke of Elowin as if she were not a victim, but part of some higher plan. He called her a proof of beauty, a person who could not be let into the city. There was no remorse, only a steady voice and a strange confidence in her own righteousness. Psychological experts later described it as narcissistic obsession disguised as aesthetic worship. When the case became public, Anchorage and the whole of Alaska reacted with shock. The people who worked with Ross could not believe that their colleague, a veteran of the service, could have covered up a murder. In service circles, it was called a betrayal of trust in the press, a tragedy of confidence in the system. The detective who had been on this path for 6 years wrote in his last report, "He didn't hate her. He just couldn't imagine a world where she was leaving and he was staying." These words are the essence of the whole case, a crime committed not out of malice, but out of an obsession that made a man a monster in the guise of a conservationist. Elwyn has been found, the truth has been revealed, but along with it is the inevitable silence that follows any truth.